Hello and welcome to the Late Late Show. My name is Kathryn Taylor. Tonight, my special guest is Katrina Blunt. I'll be chatting to Katrina about being the research lead in her school and how she navigates and the challenges of bridging the theory-practice gap. Good evening. Good evening. You're listening to the Late Late Show with Kathryn Taylor, and tonight on the show we've got the lovely Katrina Blunt here to talk to us. Katrina is the research lead in her school, and she's going to be talking to us about how she navigates the benefits and challenges of bridging the theory practice gap. And we'll be talking about how she helps the staff in her school to develop their research skills, which has led to lots and lots of benefits for researchers and also in her school. So she's really excited about research. She really enjoys it, and we're going to hear a little bit from her in a moment. I'm speaking to you live from Buckinghamshire, and let's bring Katrina into the conversation. Hi Katrina, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, thank you. Yes, I'm really good, thank you. It's great to be here. I was going to say, actually, it's quite late for me to still be awake after the first few days back at school. So I've got a lovely cup of tea in front of me, so hopefully
fabulous. Well, you're very welcome, and I think we are sort of peas in a pod to an extent because I'm very keen on my educational research, and I know that you have done an awful lot of stuff in your school, sort of really building up in terms of the research engagement in your school. So I just want to, before we start to get into it, Katrina, I'm just going to remind our listeners that if you're listening in live and you'd like to join us, either to post questions into the chat, and I can see that Paul's here. Hi, Paul. Great to have you listening this evening. Paul, great friend of the show. And also, if you want to call in, you can. You can download the Podbean app and visit ttradio.org and click on Listen Live on the homepage. This will take you directly to the show, and there you can post your comments and ask questions during our conversation. Once I've spoken to Katrina in a bit more depth, I'll open up for any of you who'd like to call in, and you can call in by pressing the icon at the top of the screen on your phone's app. If you click this, I'll be able to connect you. So how are you today, Katrina?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited to be here, Kathryn. Thank you for inviting me on.
No, you're very welcome. It's always good, and I think one of the most exciting things about this sort of broadcast service in general of Teachers Talk Radio is that it is really about teachers talking to other teachers, and I think that leads to some really authentic conversations. So I'm really happy that you've joined us this evening, and I know that coming on the radio, it's a bit of a strange sensation. So I hope that you're going to relax into it and we're going to have a really good chat. But it really is all about teachers having authentic conversations. So really happy to have you on this evening, Katrina. I wonder if you could set the scene for our listeners and just let us know what a typical day or week is like for you as far as your current role is concerned. Maybe just tell us the title of the role and the kinds of things that you would do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously there isn't really such a thing as a typical day in schools, is there? But I have three main roles at my school. So I'm a maths teacher, teaching all ages from year 7 to year 13. This is probably the most predictable part of what I do in terms of things like planning and marking. I plan for the week ahead before I leave school on a Friday, so I can sort of switch off over the weekend and then be ready for sort of anything that the world throws at me the following week. I'm also head of year 7. I would say this is sort of less predictable. I'm working with the year 7, supporting their transition as they come in from all their different primary schools and obviously throughout their first year at secondary school. And of course, anything can happen in this role. I could receive some emails, I could need to make some phone calls, students or staff could stop by my office and come and see me at perhaps break or lunch asking for some support or for some guidance on something. So that's a really varied and busy part of my role. I never sort of assume I'll get any of my free periods, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming as there could be so much to do. But I do really love that part of my role as well, and sort of supporting all of the students. And then the third part of my role is obviously, as you've mentioned, the research lead side of things. That's obviously why I'm here this evening. Now, I do think, really this could be a full-time role, but obviously, schools don't have the luxury of having full-time research leads. There's so many opportunities out there that if only we had time to sort of access all of them.
Indeed.
So the core parts of this role, so they're fairly structured around a research programme that we run each year and that we've been running for the last 5 years. And so I run this research programme with a team of staff researchers, and I can give you lots more detail about how that runs and how that works later on if
yes,
that's of interest.
That's perfect, thank you.
Yes. So, I'm working with a team of researchers each week, and what we're working on does vary sort of depending where we are in the school year and in that research process as we go through the year. And I support the researchers as we follow that process and that programme. One big part of this role is also at the end of each year, when all the researchers have completed all their research, then we actually publish an in-house journal. So that's quite a big task, actually.
Yeah.
Collate all the research that the researchers have done. I work with the designer to make it a really good journal, and then obviously many hours of proofreading to sort of make sure as far as possible that everything is pretty much perfect and we haven't sort of missed anything. I also spend time speaking with people in other schools as much as I can, and I am always really keen to work with others and collaborate where possible in terms of research. And obviously we've had conversations about that before, Kathryn. So I do have quite a busy time of it, I think, much like everyone who works in schools, really. But I do love my job, and I feel really, really very fortunate to be able to do so many sort of different things that do make a difference. So yeah, that's sort of how my days and weeks go at school.
My head's spinning. I mean, I take my hat off to you. I'm very much on the academic side and sort of teacher CPD. I think anyone who's prepared to sort of have the more reactive role of the pastoral side, I absolutely utmost respect to you, because I do completely appreciate how it can completely derail your plans for your day. So it's a really interesting role you've got there with so many facets to it, which is brilliant. Thank you for talking us through that. Okay. I'm just going to play while we sort of consider some a bit more about your role. I'm just going to play the adverts, and then we'll come back to you in a moment, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries, and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Ade, Laurel Kana, Baroness Luella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT, and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free. Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the EtonX curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Excellent, and we're back with Katrina. It's so great to have you on the show tonight. Welcome back, everyone listening as well. We've got Katrina Blunt, who's ringing in today. She's a research lead amongst many other facets of her role in her school. And Katrina, we've talked a little bit about your work and your context already, just to set the scene. And now I think it would be great to dig a little deeper into that. And I wonder if you could talk to us about what drew you into educational research and made you want to work in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've got quite a varied work background, actually. So I came into teaching as a second career, and actually even a third career. I've got an industry background originally, and I previously worked in marketing, which does sound quite a long way from where I am now. But within that, I had quite a few different, quite analytical roles. These included things like having to build business cases, which often required a lot of research and data collection and analysis, developing new products and customer propositions, which again needed lots of customer market research. I also had one role analysing advertising spend. That involved huge amounts of data. I was working with an external econometric modelling company. We were trying to make sense of where the advertising money was and wasn't working. I also come from a family of scientists with actually a couple of teachers thrown in. So I think all of that has made me quite an analytical person. I tend to research sort of everything before I do anything, which can be quite annoying sometimes, actually. It would be quite good to be able to go with the flow a bit more. But I do think it means I'm well suited to a research role. In terms of educational research, I did a couple of quite small scale projects around the time I was teacher training. These were already part of my enrichment. They weren't sort of big full research projects or anything, but they kind of gave me a taste for doing educational research. Then within a year or two of me starting working at my current school, there was a research working party set up, and it just sounded exactly the kind of thing that I really wanted to join and find out more. And so sort of getting together with like-minded people, I was just interested in finding out more about how I could try new things in my teaching, getting more involved in the research, and also really learning how to do research properly. So within the first year that I was in that group, I did a maths project sort of within my own classroom. I was looking at developing my students' problem-solving skills and looking at teaching domain-specific knowledge using direct instruction, which there's been quite a big debate about, over the years. I enjoyed that so much, then I decided to do a master's in education. So that took the next couple of years. And when I was doing my dissertation, I sort of did that kind of alongside the research working party, sort of supported by the process, even though the timings didn't quite match. But I went away and did that as I just really enjoyed my involvement in the research team so much, really. And I think it's that getting involved with research in school. It's through things like introducing new ideas in the classroom, testing and learning different things, sharing those ideas with colleagues. All helps us to develop our teaching, for the benefit of our students. I also do think researching some of the big topics is also really important. We need to make sure we're sort of staying at the forefront of the issues and changes within education. And from my perspective, helping others to develop the skills to be able to do that as well is really, really rewarding, which is obviously what I'm doing more of now in my role as research lead.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And, obviously there's a couple of things that are coming out at me from that, which is obviously the love of the research, the want to perhaps test for yourself certain pedagogical strategies that might be under debate in sort of the wider world or whatever, but also that collaborative element. You've mentioned a couple of times where you really enjoyed talking with colleagues, and I think that's such an important part of it. I mean, in my research, every time I find a school where there's really positive teaching and learning for the adults, it always comes down to schools where they've put in some kind of strategy for collaboration and co-creation, and I just think that's so key. I wonder, before we move on, would you be able to share with us perhaps an example of some of the things that a colleague or perhaps even yourself might have researched?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think about the last 5 years, we have there's been over 35 projects that have been done within school. So there's loads of them to choose from, and they really do range in from sort of your individual teacher doing a kind of lesson study within their own classroom, to people working together to test and learn different sort of the same thing across different classrooms and different subject areas, right up into some of the sort of big projects that have been done. If I give you a couple of examples or a few examples.
Yes.
So we've had a literacy project. This started about, I think it's one of the first projects that was done. They were looking at, a couple of our English teachers were looking at an audit of the approach to literacy across the school. It was a project that they started doing for 1 year, then it evolved into a project for the second year, and that actually led to a whole school literacy lead role being created. So that's kind of one of the bigger whole school projects. We've had teachers looking at things like language acquisition through different apps and gaming sort of systems on Chromebooks. So we had one of our teachers looked at that a number of years ago, looking at Spanish language acquisition, and now we've got a teacher looking this year at Latin language acquisition as well. So very different, but using that now, because we've introduced Chromebooks at our school, and it's seeing how we can use those best in the classroom as well. So it's all links in together. There's been quite a lot of projects done in the field of sort of diversity. That's again been within individual classrooms, individual subject areas, looking at particular course, textbooks, for example, to see if they're representative, looking at sort of the diversity of the students, and then the diversity of the teacher workforce, and looking at role models and those kinds of things. There's been a big project recently. One of our members of staff, she actually did a project with an external organisation, which was a fantastic opportunity. And actually, we've had a few members of staff that have done projects externally as well. This one in particular was looking at positive masculinity.
Yes.
Again, this evolved over a couple of years. So what started out through sort of conversations with students about what does masculinity look like, feel like, that she did a lot of work, sort of discussions, journaling, that kind of thing, with student groups. That led to then the second year her looking at a sort of personal development program. That then evolved into looking at positive masculinity through art and, as I said, journaling and discussion, and it sort of became quite a big project. So we've got, as I said, a real variety of projects, and really what we say at the moment really is that if staff have an area of interest, we want them to research it. We're not saying, right, you can't do that, or you have to research these particular areas. We want people to pick their areas of interest. They're more motivated to carry out the research and see those projects through, and because they mean something to them, then it can then lead to discussions across the school, and other people pick up on the things that have been researched, and then they look to see how they can apply some of those things in their own classroom. I mentioned the research program that we do, and actually we have a more formal process of sharing the research that we do. But certainly there are all those conversations that are going on, all the way through the year as we become, as a school, more and more sort of research engaged, really.
So would you say it's really sort of influenced the culture of the school then?
Yeah, I do think so. If I think back to sort of 5 years ago, when we so we're in our 6th year now, but at the end of the first year, it was the first time that we had a staff forum that had been given over to research, where the staff researchers all then presented the work that they'd been doing. And we had kind of no idea how it would be received. All the staff across the school picked a couple of project presentations that they wanted to come and see. They're able to pick ones that they feel that are more relevant to what they're doing, or something they're more interested in. So they picked 2 to go and see, and we had absolutely no idea. how we were going to be received, as I said, and actually, I mean, that was the year that I presented my maths project to the staff, and I felt a real buzz. I was giving the presentation, people were asking lots of questions, people were coming up to me afterwards to ask, I'm thinking about what you said, and I'm thinking about how that could transfer into my subject area or my classroom. And then over the last 5 years and into our 6th year now, we still have every year, 6, 7, 8 teachers that really want to take part and do some research. Every year it's a little bit like, oh gosh, have we exhausted all the people that might want to research? But actually, there's always a group of people, and some staff do come back.
I was going to ask actually whether you get repeat business.
Yeah. So I've mentioned obviously a couple of projects where the same project has evolved into a sort of an extension of the project, where the staff member has continued working on it for another year. But we've also had staff that have done perhaps a project in one area, and then they've looked and they've come back and they've done a project in a completely different area, and then they've come back and they're thinking about doing another project in another area. And I think that's great for them as well. You can have these big interest areas that sort of evolve into another year's worth of project in the same kind of research field, or actually you've got people that are thinking, well, I've done this piece of research, I've found out whatever I found out. I may, a teacher may change their own pedagogy in their own classroom, then thinking, well, actually now I want to try this thing over here. And we had one staff member that was looking at, he did his first project, I think, on whether there was a link between participation in extracurricular activities with sort of achievement and outcomes in the classroom and in results. And then he came back and he's then done another project on whether he compared using, for example, Google Forms with sort of paper-based low stakes testing to see if there was any difference in those. And he did it across a couple of different year 10 classes. And so they're very, very different projects, but he's come back and he's wanted to test something else, and we've got this program that sort of is quite tried and tested in school now, which means that people trust in the process. They, people want to be part of it, and then they do come back for more. So we do sort of get this repeat business, which is fantastic.
That's really brilliant, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about the process actually, because obviously you've got the research itself, but at the next level it's all about, you mentioned earlier, the research skills, and I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how you go about helping teachers and supporting them to sort of take a bit of a more robust methodological approach to their research and applying the skills that presumably you've developed during your masters and your other activities, but the skills of analysis, the skills of sort of trying to make sure they don't fall into the traps of confirmation bias and wishful thinking and things like that. So how do you go about setting the scene for your teachers in order to help them become sort of research practitioners in your school?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sort of setting the scene, I think because, as I said, it's a sort of tried and tested program that has, as you say, it has sort of evolved over the time that we've been doing it. Again, if I think back to my first maths project, there were lots of things that I didn't know how to do, and I wasn't necessarily doing, I guess, properly, if there's a sort of a properly way of doing things. But having been through my master's and the process and the rigour of doing a master's dissertation, then I was able to bring quite a lot of that back into the programme, which has then helped it to evolve over the time. And I certainly haven't been the only person that's been evolving it, but I'm the person that's sort of running it now. In terms of sort of setting the scene, I've talked about the recruitment of researchers. So in terms of the process, it sort of ends with the staff forum that I've talked about, or that before I then talk about how they then write up the research. But so if I think about the academic year that the programme is run over, recruitment sort of really starts at the moment. It starts around about the time when staff are seeing other people research and the presentations that they're giving. So that's sort of June time, sort of as we're getting towards the end of the academic year, teachers will be seeing this research. They'll be suddenly then they may have been having some ideas already about some research, thinking about it, but that's probably the catalyst sometimes for them to step forward, put their hand up and say, actually, yeah, I'd quite like to do some research next year. So then we start to have some of those conversations, as I said, at the end of the academic year. And then in the September that's just gone, so I launched the research programme for this year. And then the teachers that have sort of signed up, as you were, to do the research. So we all get together, we start talking about their ideas for the research, some of the reading, what's brought them here in terms of wanting to undertake a piece of research. And then we spend sort of September to about October half term carrying on reading. And this is where, depending on who's in the room and whether they've done research before, will sort of help determine what it is that we talk about and the sort of level of detail and the depth that we go into. Because if I've got teachers who've already done research, they don't need the same level of support as those that have never done a piece of research before. So I can really tailor those sessions. But so as I said, September, October is sort of the reading, but it's also about how do you find sources? How do you make sure they're sort of credible? Looking at recency, number of citations, are they peer reviewed, all that sort of thing. And then the staff are really immersing themselves in their chosen research area. Throughout that, we're meeting every fortnight, so we're discussing what's been read, we're bouncing ideas off each other. But the staff member, as I said, is sort of becoming the expert, as you were, in that sort of area as far as the reading that they've been doing. But it's my role to sort of facilitate and support them to do that, to make sure they're sort of starting to follow this robust process, so that the sources that they are looking at, that they are, that they're good, credible, reliable sources. What I also talk to them about, and you'll be really aware of this, Kathryn, in what you're doing, is that I really urge them to keep really good notes of the things that they're reading. There is nothing worse than reading something amazing, thinking that's going to be a fantastic quote. I want to use that later. Or you come to your write-up of your research, and then you think, I read something that's brilliant, but I cannot remember where I read it, and you sort of search around, scrabble around, trying to remember where you saw it, and it can just be really, really time consuming. So right at the beginning, I'm saying to them, keep really good notes. What have you read? Where can you go back into it? What was it that you think might be a good sort of quote, for the future? So then after October half term, it really is about sort of honing that research idea down. So we go from sort of a sort of broad area of research to actually coming up with research questions. Is there a hypothesis? Really setting what it is that they want to research. And that's really to sort of help avoid the project's kind of the scope creeping, or they have this awful habit sometimes, don't they, of kind of getting bigger and bigger and bigger and out of control.
Yeah, and it boundaries on, don't you? And it's hard to do, but it's so necessary, because Absolutely. It just becomes completely unwieldy and nebulous otherwise, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And also, obviously, the more specific you make it, then the more that will inform the next step and the next step and the next step. So, we could go from something like, I don't know, for example, does retrieval practice work as a kind of theme? They could be looking at that, doing lots of reading, to then something as specific as, I don't know, does using weekly low stakes testing for retrieval practice improve the test scores and reduce test anxiety in year 9 history, for example,
exactly.
and be really, really specific. So then we know, right, I'm looking specifically at low stakes testing. I'm looking particularly at, perhaps pre and post test scores. On, whether we can assess test anxiety is another, and actually that was something I was hoping to look at in my master's, which sort of got a little bit derailed by the pandemic, but we can come back to that if we have time. But it does really inform them, if it's students you need to research with, which ones, is it a whole year group, is it a particular class, and obviously that will depend on what the project is. Is it staff that they want to recruit as part of their project, and then we also talk about possible data collection methods. So is it quantitative data, qualitative data? They're going to use questionnaires, focus groups, diaries, observations, all those kinds of things. We will also, at that stage, also talk about ethical considerations.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
So this is a real for me. I mean, obviously for research as a whole, but I think since having done my dissertation, I'm even more keen and clear that we absolutely need to have these conversations and make sure that what we're doing are, is ethical in every respect. And obviously things like confidentiality, anonymity, the sort of keeping people's data secure, gaining that consent. And also one big thing we talk about is also about doing insider research. So quite a lot of people are going to be thinking about, we've got a project going on this year. One of our art teachers is looking at building sort of careers, sort of more career information into the curriculum to then, so when students are picking their options for their GCSEs, do they really have an appreciation of some of the jobs out there, the occupations that they can be doing, and that art could be really useful for example. And so we've had quite a long conversation about, well, actually, if you're going to sit in front of your own students and ask them what they think about art, that could be very tricky, because that, are they going to really, be
honest?
Honest, yeah. Are they going to say what they think you want to hear, or are they going to? So that's all of these things we're talking about even before we go out and ask anybody anything or gather any data, and this is all happening sort of before Christmas. And what I would say is, obviously some of these timings are a little bit fluid. So at the moment we're sending out for some of the projects information letters and consent forms and all those kinds of things, sort of as we speak, really. So then after Christmas, January to February half term, that's when we really want to be collecting the data. It can be quite a short half term though, sometimes, like this time. So that often then continues into the following half term after February. Once we've obviously collected the data, then we talk about data analysis. We don't expect our staff to sort of do deep statistical analysis unless they really want to. We don't want to scare anyone off doing research.
Oh, you spoil sport. I love a bit of SPSS.
And of course, and actually, if we've got projects that lend themselves to that, then we have got other experts around the school that have experience that we can sort of draw on. I mean, when I was doing my maths project, although I'm a maths teacher, I went to the head of maths and said, right, is there some kind of statistical tool I can use for this? And we certainly draw upon expertise from around the school, even if people are not actually part of the research group. So, I mean, that's the sort of data analysis part. And as I said, we don't want to scare anybody off, but also they might not have been collecting, obviously, quantitative data. There might have been, might be more observations or sort of quotes from focus groups and things like that.
Do they ever use naturally occurring data that's being collected anyway, like looking at student progress or anything like that? Or would you encourage them to actually generate some data?
I think a bit of both, and I think it depends what they're researching. And I think some of the information letters that go out to parents do sort of say on there, some of these things are happening anyway. But what we're looking for is consent for your child's data to be included in a research study. So it's not necessarily saying we're going to reinvent the wheel every time and you have to collect lots of new data. If it's about, I don't know, low stakes testing, and does it make a difference? So if you're doing assessments before and assessments after anyway, it's then I'm just doing something different in the middle part and I'm seeing if it makes a difference. So absolutely, if it's there anyway, it can obviously really help depending on what the project is. So then after Easter, the data's been collected, data's been analysed, and then we're then working towards our staff forum. So as talked about before, that's where the researchers present their work. And then after the forum, I've mentioned the journal. So we've got this in-house journal, which we're really, really proud of. And the researchers write up their research. It can be a sort of more formal paper, an article, an interview that we can sort of have an interview with them about it. And then that gets published. This one was published about October, November time for last year. And then we're able to send that out. We have it on our website, and visitors to the school can come and see and sort of read about all the research that's been doing. So it's quite it's a big piece of work across the year, but it is really robust, and we want to make sure that our research, as far as possible, can stand up to scrutiny. People we get challenged, and sometimes staff come and ask us individual questions about pieces of research, and we're able to say, actually, this is the process we followed, this is the hypothesis, this is the process we went through, so that we feel like, and we are able to say that we are doing good, robust research within the school.
No, that's really good, and I don't want to take away from anything you were going to say, but I noticed that we did share a bit of a conversation, a few notes beforehand, and you have this wonderful quote from Jonathan Firth, which is, "If education is not informed by research, then what is it informed by? All too often the answer will be traditions and assumptions, some of which will be flawed, and we won't even know which ones." And I wondered if I could ask you to draw out a little bit why you've sort of been drawn to that quote, and what is it about that quote in particular that makes you really driven to make teachers into skilled practitioner researchers in your organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that is a quote that I use a lot. It's one that I am really drawn to, actually. You know, I think, there's so many teachers that have been teaching for such a long time, and they've got so much experience and expertise that, that we have so much to learn from them. As I said, I've come to teaching as a second career, and relatively late to teaching, or recently to teaching, compared to some of the teachers that I work alongside. So I think there's a lot to be learned from teachers, as I said, that have been teaching a long time. But I also think that keeping abreast of research and things that are emerging, that we need to make sure that we are not always thinking, well, what we've always done is the best thing to be doing. And actually, there was another quote that I was also really drawn to, which was Dylan William. He said quite recently that it's about creating a culture where every teacher believes they need to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be better. And that's another thing that I really buy into. For me, it's about that continuous improvement. It's striving to be better, and that sort of how to become better, being grounded in research. But I also think it's not necessarily, we don't have to position it as sort of being better. We're not saying that you're not a good enough teacher, but what we can do is through research, through what we're reading and we're learning about, sort of as things emerge and things evolve, it's about providing the conditions so that our students can be developed in the best way possible, whether that's in their subjects or pastorally or character. So by encouraging teachers to engage with research, try new things, reflect, report on their experiences, present it even, I think we can all be continually improving for the benefit of our students. And it's not, and that doesn't take anything away from experience and expertise and that longevity, but I think it's just being open to trying new things, and that.
Absolutely. And I think that part of what you're doing is obviously building up the skills in people, but building up the capacity in people as well. So I think that one of the things that I've noticed is that the more research engaged teachers are, then the more we're able to notice, and actually you stop thinking so much about what you're doing and start to actually notice the nuance, and it becomes the dialogue surrounding it just becomes so much lower threat, because you're of a mindset where it's like, well, I'm going to try this, I'm going to see. Whereas I think if you are only going on experience, then you can fall into the trap of feeling a little defensive, which is perhaps it's not that helpful. So I think it's a really holistic thing that's really good for teachers in general, as well as the particular things they might find out. I mean, so I want to move on a little bit, if I may, just to talk about how what is it about spreading this out to the teachers that really inspired you, because you've obviously got your own interests, and we can all see the value in what you're doing and the actual particular things you find out, but what's really motivated you to get involved in the CPD side of it and really try to develop adults as well as seeing the benefits to the students in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, at my school we've got a really well developed CPD program. There's lots of different pathways to choose from, lots of different working parties that staff can join, and we encourage people to contribute to whichever ones that they're interested in. They can decide what to get involved in, and think about what skills they want to develop. I mean, I obviously run the research working party, but that's just one group that staff can get involved in, where as I said, lots of staff do look to come and develop their skills and want to undertake research projects. And as I said before, I think it's because we have been doing it now, and it has been evolving, and it has, the more we've done it, the more the school has felt more research engaged, so that it's become quite a normal and usual thing for people to start being involved, and also even in sort of everyday conversations, and even in all in the other working parties, having the discussions around how can we underpin what some of you are doing in your different working parties with research, so that we're not sort of a separate working party. I think we'll always have this core team of people every year who are researching the things that they are interested in, and I think that's really important to hang on to. But actually working together with all the different working parties where there are opportunities again to collaborate. We've talked quite a lot about collaboration, but if there's one working party that's looking at a particular thing one year and they know that's coming, well, they could almost commission some research to help them to further their work, and they can come to the research working party and say, actually, there may not be somebody working on it, or it may not be a project idea that some individual teachers come up with, but actually there's an opportunity here that if someone wants to look in this area, then we'll be able to use that in our further work in a different area of the school. So I think certainly the research working party will evolve over the next number of years, as much as it has over the 5 years up until now. And also in terms of sort of the passion for getting people involved, I think it's some of it's about the benefits. The research that we've been doing. I mean, I think that there's this debate, isn't there, around there's one school of thought that says, is there actually any value in an individual member of staff doing an individual project in an individual classroom when it's where's the value in that? But actually, we have seen so much value from all of the projects that have been done over the last 5 years, and I think encouraging teachers to be research engaged, to be to develop those research skills, kind of can really we can then really see the benefit in lots of different ways. So for example, even joining the working party, people come together from so many different parts of the school, working with people from different subject areas, different length of time that have been at school. Some have different, maybe departmental or pastoral responsibilities. We have support staff that are doing research projects from time to time. It really is open to everybody. So you get to work with so many different people that you probably you might know them in passing, but you haven't necessarily ever had the opportunity to work with them.
So it kind of stops those silos forming, perhaps those silos of knowledge where everyone's sort of, they don't go to the staff room anymore, they're just in their office. And do you think it actually helps with the general cross-pollination, if you like?
I think it does, and I think as I said, with the different working parties, so many staff get involved in one or more working parties. You probably, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would say the majority of staff probably get involved one way or another, whether that's through regular meetings or being involved in trying out lots of different things. And I think over time we have gone from a separate working party to then sort of working with lots of different people in different working parties, lots of people across the school. So these conversations are all happening and making these connections with lots of people that you would, as I said, not necessarily have worked with. The lady that's doing the art project this year, I've not really worked with her before. There's lots of, and likewise lots of people that have done research over the years that we've been doing it, just coming together fortnightly to discuss what they're doing, and then they kind of go back and discuss it in their departments, and lots of conversations are happening. So people, I think, just more and more buy into having research sort of underpinning what we're doing, as a good thing, as something that they're really embracing. as well. So
that's really great. Thank you. I mean, I've just seen Paul has put on the chat that he works in a primary school. We're talking about secondary here, and obviously they're larger organisations. But what I might say in response to Paul and Katrina, I'd be interested to know your views on this as well in a moment, because I get involved with the ECT, particularly the second year of the ECF framework, where there's a real focus on practitioner research and professional inquiries, and all ECTs would be engaged in designing and carrying out a string of different professional inquiries. So I do think, in answer to your question, Paul, I think that there are things that individual teachers can do, but I think, and I appreciate that it can be more challenging in a smaller organisation, but I think that if the school leaders are minded to set some directed time aside for co-creation and the design of things that people might want to find out, and do some very small research projects, then I think it's not impossible. But I having not worked in a primary school, I don't want to speak too much to the logistics of that. Katrina, I wonder if you've got any thoughts on the scale of these things. We've thought about it being scaled up. Do you think it can be scaled down?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So the staff forum that we had last year, actually, we invited some external people to come to the forum, and I spent the hour before the staff forum talking the visitors through basically some of what we've been talking about this evening. So how we'd started and how things have evolved, and some of the enablers to the research in our school. And some of the people that came to that were actually from primary schools. And through the discussion, I mean, I said right back at the beginning, didn't I? I do feel very privileged to have a research lead role, and lots of schools don't have them. And certainly, I was speaking to a primary school colleague a few weeks ago who sort of looked at me like, we'd never have a research lead role in our primary school. But through the session that I ran, one thing that came out was, again, back to collaboration. There was a primary school there that was really interested in doing a piece of research. And the way that we were going to take that forward was actually they were going to start following our process, and I was going to support them sort of cross school, so that they were carrying out the research within their school, doing what they wanted to do with the research, but they were going to kind of keep up in terms of the process, so that they were sort of doing the same things at the same time that we were doing. So they were sort of having the benefit of that structured program and somebody to bounce ideas off, whilst not having to set up the whole structure within their own school. I mean, what I would say is, obviously in primary, and actually what happened with that project at the moment is that structures changed, and the time then wasn't available to do that this year. But it's certainly something that we would look to do with primary schools, or even other, any other school in the future, where and actually I have had a number of conversations with different schools, both secondary and primary, up and down the country. It's not been that many conversations, but there's been local and national, and even one conversation with a school overseas around working together to, for us to support other schools. There are schools that are a long way further ahead on their journey and in this path than we are, but we know we're quite a long way forward versus some schools that are perhaps starting out. And I would certainly be really open to sort of conversations with schools wherever they might be, in terms of supporting schools that are really keen to undertake research, and we, any way we can help and support that, very, very happy to hear from people, really. So whether that's primary or secondary, but I think there is an appetite and an increasing appetite in terms of doing research in primary. But as you say, Kathryn, I don't work in primary, so I don't know all of the challenges, but certainly I have started to have some of those conversations with primary colleagues to just see how we can support that for them.
No, that's really brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to take another short break now. Just we've got about 12 minutes left of the show. Going to take another short break, and then we come back and let's get into some of the challenges, and perhaps once we've talked about that very briefly, we'll open it up for anyone who might want to ring in and contribute. Okay, so we'll come back in just a moment.
Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Kana, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free! Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Excellent, and we're back just for the last sort of 10 minutes or so, and welcome back, Katrina, and thank you so much. You've shared some really excellent ideas with us, and it's been a real pleasure hearing from you, and it's so clear how enthusiastic and buoyed you are by your work. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful, but it's not always a straight or easy linear path, is it? And I wonder if you could just spend a moment telling us a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced in terms of the implementation of these projects or the whole process itself.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to say in terms of challenges, I think sometimes it can be a challenge to think about which of all of the opportunities do we go for? What should we research? Because there are so many different areas. You know, as I've said, the projects that happen in my school are so varied every year. And sometimes people come and say, I'd quite like to research this area. And I'd be thinking, well, I had absolutely no idea that was even an area. You know, so there are so many opportunities that we can sort of embrace. And it's that, you know, that can be quite overwhelming sometimes to think about, well, what areas should we focus in? I think one quite key area, we talked a little bit earlier about sort of lots of reading and making sure we're getting credible sources and all those kinds of things. But sometimes just simply the access to some of that can be so difficult. You know, so much research is hidden behind paywalls. Again, you can be searching, scrabbling around. You know, you've perhaps looked on, you know, Google Scholar or something, and you've seen something that looks fantastic, just exactly what you're looking for, and then you click through, and it's about, you know, £50 for 24-hour access or something.
Yes.
So, and actually, I was at a research conference in September, and there was a member of the audience, and I do apologise to them because I don't know who they were, so I can't credit them with this idea. But they were talking about, you know, could it not be possible for teachers somehow to get access with their DFE number or something? You know, just because then actually, if people are doing this research, you know, there is a purpose for that. And if it's academic, you know, educational research, surely the purpose is to get it into the hands of the people that could actually implement it. Yes. But we do find it so difficult sometimes to actually find stuff to read, or as I said, we find things that we really want to read, but actually then we can't access it. Having said that, you know, I don't think the answer is that we ask all teachers to go and seek out and read academic journal papers, or, you know,
they can be quite hefty, can't they?
They can, and again, even if you do get through them, you know, I don't think, again, it's practical to ask teachers to individually work out, you know, how to develop their teaching based on what they've read. And so I also think that one challenge is having research available in sort of bite-sized, you know, digestible formats. So again, it gets into the hands of teachers, but it isn't hard going, and, pages and pages and reams of research to get through and sort of work your way through.
Chunky methodology section.
Yeah, exactly. I sort of tend to read the abstract and the conclusions. That's sort of the way to go, I think. And even if you do, as I said, if you do read it, there is that gap, I think. Even if we can read it and digest it, there is that gap between sort of academia and the implementation, and that's a gap that I would really, going forward, if I think about how my role can evolve over the next few years, there's lots of different ways it can evolve, but one of those ways, could be looking at perhaps working with universities or institutions to try and sort of bridge that gap between the work that they're doing. Perhaps we become a school that they test research in. I don't know what it might look like, but certainly at the moment it just feels like there's research out there. We need to access it. We want to read it, and then we want to try and do something with it. And then also one thing we haven't really talked about tonight so far is about that importance of context. Again, if you're reading papers and research that may have excellent outcomes and the conclusions are all really, really positive, but that will have taken place in a setting or a number of settings in particular environments, when just because it works somewhere over here doesn't necessarily mean that it works in our setting. So
that is exactly the subject of my doctorate.
Oh, okay.
Is what is it? What are those kind of magic ingredients that, when what's going on, that, and can you kind of identify it? Can you create it? I mean, probably not, but that's exactly my area of like, well, why is it working here and not there? And how do you contextualize things and make an organization kind of open to it, really?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're not trying in our school to do sort of randomized controlled trials and come out with sort of these conclusions that this definitely works everywhere. What we're doing is we're doing lots of reading, and we're saying from what we've read, once we've been able to access it, but from what we've read, then how could this look in our school or in our in an individual classroom or whatever it is that we're looking at, to then say, well, does this thing that we've read about actually transfer into our context? So we're not trying to invent lots of new research. We're not trying to do, as I said, randomized control trials. I think they'd be incredibly difficult to do from an ethics perspective in an individual school anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced it's possible.
No, I don't.
With human beings, really.
Exactly.
Unless it's an actual medicine or something, And
also, you've got the issues potentially of saying, right, well, I've come across this really great thing that looks like it's going to be really brilliant, but what we're going to do is we're only going to let some of you have access to it, and the rest of the students, we're going to keep doing the thing that we think isn't as good. As soon
until
as
we can confirm how badly we're failing you.
exactly. So actually, what we're doing is saying, well, we've read this thing, this research in whatever field it might be, and we're saying, actually, let's see if it does work. And we might want to have some kind of control group, but we don't want to sort of deprive a group of students from something that we think is really good, and that's where a randomized control trial would fall down in a school anyway, particularly in if you were just trying to do it in one setting. So so absolutely that context, that I'm trying to think where we were coming from, but we were talking about, weren't we, that gap between the research that's coming from academia and then that gap between actually getting it into the classroom. So that, I think, is one of the biggest sort of challenges. But
no, it's
Sorry, go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's where I think, kind of going full circle here, that's where having, team of staff that are research engaged, that want to carry out research and want to be doing this and are really passionate about it. We can't solve the issues of access to journals and everything, but what we can do is we are sort of helping to develop this culture of research, where staff are hearing from colleagues' experiences, they're getting buoyed up by it, they're getting excited by it, they're very open to sort of research engaged risk taking, so that then we can see what works in our context as well. So.
No, that's really brilliant. Thank you. And we are very nearly out of time. And I've got a couple of messages here. Mr. Zima, I don't know if the school districts are going on strike right now in Canada. I'm really sorry not to be able to answer your question. And I did see it, and I apologise for not having that information. But I hope you're very well, and I hope that whatever is going on gets resolved. And we have another comment here from Paul as well. Thank you, Paul. You've found, particularly in primary, that environmental factors are a massive influence on outcome and therefore data. Research on ideal environments for assessment would be really good to read and useful too. And Paul, I wonder, we've got only a couple of minutes left, but I wonder if do you mean sort of the home environments of the children that's actually very influential in your context? Yeah, so both. So the sort of the school environment, the home environment, and of course there's so much that we can't control and is beyond our influence as well. So I think certainly in my journey as an educational researcher, you have to start to think about, where can I shine my torch, and can I see what is a little bit murky at the moment and clarify it very slightly. And really we can't do much more than that, and that's a really valuable thing, because if enough of us have got a torch, then we can clarify quite a lot, but it's always, the waters of human beings are extremely muddy. It's an extremely complex environment. We're extremely complex creatures, and our cultures and our socialization are extremely complex as well. And I think, to sort of stretch the analogy, if we could have a workforce of teachers who've all got, a good torch and are willing to shine it into the dark places, then I think that would be an excellent thing for the knowledge we could generate and share in our communities. So I'm just going to wrap up now. Thank you so much, Katrina. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that you've enjoyed talking to us and our listeners tonight. I know that there will be an awful lot of people that come back and listen on the podcast as well. And as I mentioned the podcast, I'm just going to remind you all that we have shows on Teachers Talk Radio throughout the week, and they are available to download on Spotify or Podbean or teacherstalkradio.org as well. And please do have a look. There's all kinds of topics on there which you might be interested in. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please do get in touch as well, because we're always looking for content, and we're always looking for teachers to have conversations, interesting conversations with each other, to form an archive of really interesting teachers talking about their practice and the challenges and opportunities that we experience. So thank you so much for Katrina again for joining us, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And so it brings us to the end of today's Late Late Show. Many thanks to our special guest today, Katrina Blunt, and to all of you who've joined us live and who might be listening back. Remember, there are Teachers Talk Radio shows on all week. Join me again fortnightly at the same time. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.